Adventures in Grace. This is Jim Hockaday. We're going to get into the 31st video of what is Christianity. Now, I'm sure somebody can come up with a lot more. Maybe someone else would have shortened this up a little bit. But let's jump right back into acknowledging the Lord. And before we do, number one, as always, we share with you that we really stress that God needs to become real in your life. The voice of God, the presence of God, the awareness of God. And of course, it's all up to how much time you want to invest in Him. Now, I can hear the wheels thinking, I'm so busy. I've got 2 jobs. We need to get used to actually having Him on the job, allowing the Lord to become real wherever we go. And it's an awareness of knowing that He's there with you. Just like if somebody were going with you everywhere you went, to not be rude, you would acknowledge them. And the more you acknowledge them, the more interaction you would have. And just knowing that they're there is a great comfort to your heart, especially in the world that we live in, knowing that God's with you, that He's for you, He's not against you, His strength and His power is there for you. Put all that together and God becomes real to you, and faith becomes, number 2, something that gets answers to prayers, and number 3, we're able to share testimonies of what the Lord has done in our life. And so we jump into Matthew 11:27-30 in the Message Bible. And it says this: "Now Jesus resumed talking to the people, but now tenderly. The Father has given me all these things to do and say." This is a unique father and son operation coming out of father and son intimacies and knowledge. "No one knows the Son the way the Father does, nor the Father the way the Son does. But I'm not keeping it to myself. I'm ready to go over it line by line with anyone willing to listen. Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me, work with me, watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting upon you. Keep company with me and you'll learn how to live freely and lightly." Well, in our last session, we ended up with, and I'll just give you these last few thoughts here. This is really, really good. It's in the Message Bible. In fact, I'll read the whole thing, but we won't elaborate on it. It's Hebrews 8:10-12. "This new plan I'm making with Israel isn't going to be written on paper, isn't going to be chiseled in stone. This time I'm writing out the plan in them, carving it on the lining of their hearts. I'll be their God, they'll be my people. They won't go to school to learn about me or buy a book called God in 5 Easy Lessons. They'll all get to know me firsthand, the little and the big, the small and the great. They'll get to know me by being kindly forgiven with the slate of their sins forever wiped clean." Why, with the slate of their sins forever wiped clean, will they get to know Him? Well, remember, it's the condemnation from wrong choices, which we call sin. And of course, not all wrong choices are sin, but it's the sinfulness of man that brings the condemnation, the shame, and the guilt. And if you have shame, condemnation, and guilt towards someone, then probably you're wanting to avoid them at all costs. Why? Well, you just don't want to have to deal with them. You don't want to have to see them face to face. The first thing that happened to man, who only knew complete and utter fellowship with God and perfection, is he hid himself. Adam hid himself in the garden. And God said, "Where are you?" And he said, "Well, I hid myself because I was afraid." And God said, "Who told you that you were afraid?" Well, who told them that they were afraid was condemnation. And so when sin is removed, now I realize our goal in life isn't, in a sense, to try to live sinless. Now hold on, I realize that sounds funny, that sounds wrong. But our goal in life is to enhance and enjoy the fellowship of this new covenant. And in that fellowship, in that relationship, not only through the Word of God and the understanding of truths that have been left for us to live in the presence of the Lord, but also through the communication of you and God together, your life becomes perfected. Your your paradigm shifts enough that things you struggle with, you no longer struggle with because you've lost the desire for them. Now that sure beats the old covenant law of trying harder not to do what you don't want to do and trying harder to do the right thing that you haven't been able to do. Let's just learn how to involve God in everything we do and actually enjoy his presence, where if bad company corrupts good morals, the presence of the Lord begins to completely alter and change from the top of our head to the sole of our feet, meaning change the way we see things, change even our desires and our tastes for life, and then begin to change this physical body's patterns. Well, this is all very possible in a relationship. I don't know if you've ever been around somebody that's been a great influence in your life, but if you have, you probably start to act a little bit like them. You probably start to act a little bit less like you used to. Well, this is all a part of God's plan. And so as we begin here and just begin to move forward, you know, we've given you the illustration of the 5 bars on a phone where you've got connectivity, where the cell service is really great and you can talk without a problem with one another, you and someone else, or you can go onto the internet and search information. But the moment your cell service wanes or it begins, your bars begin to go down, all of a sudden now you've got problems. Well, that phone may have power. That phone may have the potential of information. That phone may have great potential to give you information for your day. But if you're not connected, it's not going to really help you. And so these are some of the things that we want to think about in our relationship with God. The choices we make are the choices that we're making, connecting us in a greater measure to the tangibility of God. Now listen to how I said that, not just to God, the tangibility of God. In other words, each and every choice you make toward the Lord is a choice you're not making toward the flesh and the world. It's kind of like, you could say it like this: I go into the woods and I have my compass and I realize I'm walking straight south, so that when I get where I'm going, if I'll walk straight north, I'll go right back to my car. But on the way back, I take a little bit of just a jaunt over to the right. Maybe let's just say 5 feet. But I don't go back 5 feet to the left. And then up a little bit further, I come across a stream I didn't come across before. And in order to cross it, I have to go another 15, 20 feet to the right, so that I can cross it where it's a little bit thinner, where it's not as wide, and I cross that, but I don't go back 25 feet. Am I going to get to the road if I have my compass on north? The answer is yes, you'll get to the road. Will I get to my car? The answer is no, because the car is going to be 25 paces to the left. So if you think about that in life, this is exactly what we do to ourselves. We constantly are thinking about the flesh and the world, and we make choices that gratify the flesh or magnify the connection of our flesh to this world. This world meaning the society, the way that man does life, where all the hustle and the bustle and the worry and the anxiety and the fretting of life is, and the cares of life that choke the word, make it unprofitable. Mark chapter 4. Well, if this is what we do, click by click by click, what's the possibility that you're 100 clicks away at the end of the day from the tangibility of God? Now, grace is so amazing that to acknowledge immediately, Lord, look what I've done. I've clicked myself away from you. You aren't even very real to me right now, Lord. It's like, where are you? Where are you? Where are you? Where are you? Like you're in, an echo chamber. Well, the moment you acknowledge your distance away from the tangibility of God, instantly, grace puts you right back in the very presence and tangibility of God, where He, again, it can be and should be and will be, if you'll continue to just stay in a consciousness of Him, more and more tangible or more and more real. God was never supposed to not be real. Do you mind if I take a side journey? I know we're not going to get into all that we're supposed to, and this is the reason why. There's 31 videos on what is Christianity. But you know, over there in the book of Hebrews, it's a faith chapter. And in that faith chapter, we see people having encounters, experiences with God. In fact, if you look at them, the greatest number of those in that chapter had experiences with the Lord. And then out of those experiences, they responded in faith with what they said and what they did and how they acted, and they stayed steadfast to what the Lord said, or they put themselves in a position where you normally wouldn't put yourself there because the Lord said, I will give you the mountain, I will give you the war, and they presented themselves to the battle and ran to the enemy. When why would you run to an enemy? Run the other way, see? But there's one guy in there that actually used his faith to experience God, and that guy's name is Enoch. But my point of discussion is, if you do the math and look at the percentage that actually experienced God and then operated in faith, and yet they're in the faith chapter, by faith Abraham, by faith Moses. You know, they had experiences with God and then responded. I mean, you remember Moses, seeing a fiery bush? Well, that's a pretty telling experience that will definitely change the way you see life. And then he responded. Now, it wasn't really fun. He had to continue to work with God, but from that moment, he began to open his heart up to the voice of God. And God began to work with him to help him to become confident that through the Lord's strength and power, God was going to use him to deliver the children of Israel. On and on and on we go. My point is, if the greatest majority of them are having experiences with God versus the one that had an experience by his faith, then what's the possibility that maybe God wants to show himself to us a whole lot more than we think, and the tangibility of God is something that actually he desires, not just some preacher trying to take a twist on what is Christianity and make a presentation. This really is and could be God, the way he set it up. So as we go, let's just look at some things here, because I'm going over to Psalm 139, 7 to 13, because the first thing I want to do is I want to present to you, is God everywhere? You say, well, of course he's everywhere. Okay, well then let me ask you a simple question. If he's everywhere, how come it's taking so long for us to find him? I mean, think of it, folks. This is kind of absurd in a sense. If we just used even our natural or human reasoning, if God's everywhere, we should be bumping into him all the time. Oh, excuse me. That's what it's like when you're in a crowded room with people. You have to say things like, excuse me, or, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bump you. God's everywhere. Why aren't we bumping into him all the time? Unless we've been trained by the world to not consider that he is who he is. We've been trained by religion to make experiencing God be so difficult that we've got to jump through hoops and become perfect in order to do it. I thank God he was able, that he saved me while I was not perfect. He made me perfect inside so that I can hang out with him constantly and become even more perfected on the outside. Aren't you thankful God's so loving and kind? So if he's everywhere, let's just look at this. 7 to 13, it says, where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend into heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall not fall on me, even the night shall be light about me. Indeed, the darkness shall not hide from you, but the night shines as the day. The darkness and the light are both alike to you. For you formed my inward parts. You covered me in my mother's womb. Just take a few verses like that, Psalm 139, 7 to 13 in the New King James Version, and recognize God really is everywhere. Well, if he's everywhere, then we ought to be able to find him anywhere. Okay, we gave you an illustration some time ago about New York City, Times Square in the evening on a beautiful clear night. Could you see, and do you think you can see, the stars? And when you look up, the haze that comes from the brightness of all those lights makes it really difficult to see through that haze and actually see the stars. But if you went 30 miles west into the Catskill Mountains or just even the foothills, and you looked up, you'd see a whole sky full of stars. One of the things I love about being out here, where we live is there's not any street lights. So at nighttime you go out and you look up and it's not completely dark because there are homes, but it's dark enough you can see many, many stars. Okay, well, here's the point of that illustration. The city, the lights in the city represent what man built. The country represents what God made. The closer you're attached to society and the way society does life, the less chance you're going to have of seeing the stars or experiencing God. See, it's got to be one or the other. There's got to be a give and take. If you're swallowed up in the world, you probably are not very aware of God at all. If let's just say you go and you live in a cave, where you talk to no one and you're in the presence of the Lord and you're out there in nature, you're probably very close to the Lord, but you're very unaware of what's going on in society. Well, obviously, we're in the world. God placed us in the world not to hide, because then no one would hear the testimonies of what God has done. But we're in the world. We're just not of the world. And the not of the world part is the part where you continue to stay connected to Him. So what's one of the ways to stay connected to Him? And this is where I want to get to over in Romans chapter 1. I just want to explain this here. I'll read the Message Bible first, and then I'm going to read the Passion Translation before we're done for today. And then we'll come back here the next time and just pick up where we left off. But I want to share with you because, people see individuals, in a relationship with God and think, look at all the years they spent, in that relationship and how old they are in the Lord, and I'm just starting. Or someone would say, I'm 40 years saved, but I don't have any testimonies to save my life. How do I even get back to this? Well, the number one way of you connecting with God happens to be in the world that God made. In fact, it's so the number one way that it works for those who are saved, and it actually works for those who are not saved. So Romans 1, 18 to 23 in the Message Bible, it says, but God's angry displeasure erupts as acts of human mistrust and wrongdoing and lying accumulate as people try to put a shroud over truth. But the basic reality of God is plain enough. Open your eyes and there it is. By taking a long and thoughtful look at what God has created. Think about that. What's he talking about? He's talking about nature. He's talking about the earth. Am I going down a path of New Age thinking? No, let me say it this way. New Age thinking has some of the most wonderful thoughts of Jesus Christ and of what God has made. Now, of course, I believe with all my heart they've perverted things, but at the same time, what I'm sharing with you is that there is a connection to God from nature. You say, how come? Because God made everything we see. And the very presence of God is in the very things that he made, just like the presence of God is in you. And you can touch that divine spark that's inside your heart. You take yourself and go into the woods or go into the mountains like what I'm looking at even right now. And you get there and all of a sudden the things at the office disappear. And the difficulties with the family disappear. And all of a sudden there's a sense of peace and tranquility that comes over you. Well, what is that? Well, that's just simply the presence of the Lord and your ability to notice the things that God has made. And in the noticing, immediately there's a sense of praise or worship to God. So as we go further, let's just look a little bit here, and then we'll look at some things Jesus said just to help you to see that I'm not getting off in this. This is just very, very simple, and it's a basic way that we can connect with God. Open your eyes, and there it is. By taking a long and thoughtful look at what God has created, people have always been able to see what their eyes as such can't see. Eternal power, for instance, and the mystery of his divine being. So nobody has a good excuse. Well, the Passion Translation, my time is going very quickly, of the same passage says, "For God in heaven unveils his holy anger, breaking forth against every form of sin, both toward ungodliness that lives in the hearts and evil actions. For the wickedness of humanity deliberately smothers the truth and keeps people from acknowledging the truth about God." Isn't that interesting? We're talking about acknowledgement, and it is the wickedness of man that will smother truth so you don't acknowledge it. Wow, that's really good. Our time is up, and I really, don't want to stop. But for the sake of the video staying where it needs to stay, let's come back and jump right into this. What you're going to say when we're done is what you shared with me about connecting with God is just too simple. In fact, the cool thing, while we're talking right now, I'm watching a deer prance across our backyard right here. And so cool just to look at nature, to see the beauty of the mountains, and just know in your heart, man, God made that all for us. What a wonderful connection. Grace story, real quick. Just very simply, one of the nights I had just recently in prayer, the Lord said to me about some things that I'm seeking God about and wanting to present myself in a place for God to use me more in certain ways, in certain areas. The Lord stressed very definitely to my heart. And this may be for someone else that's listening. I am doing this work in you. It's not a work that you are perfecting within yourself. It's a work that I'm doing in your heart. And as I complete the things that I've started, you'll look back and see that it wasn't you, it was me who was doing that work in you. And the work will be done, and it'll be finished, and you'll be in a place, the place your heart desires, to minister and to walk in life with such wonderful holiness, walk in life with such wonderful presence of the Lord. And it was something he was stressing in my heart that he's doing for me. That may be for some of you that might be looking, at all of your New Year's resolutions and all the work you're going to do and how hard you're going to go after them. Well, I realize there is a diligence to life, but open up your heart and let God be the one that works in your heart and perfects that which concerns him. Well, go to our ministry website, jhmi.com, and find our email, which is jhmi@jhmi.com, and definitely share with us your grace stories. God bless you.